Welcome, Mr. Arda Batu, and thank you to be with us today. We are here to speak about the ARI movement, and my first question is, how could cultural diplomacy be used by your organization in order to achieve the main goals and objectives?
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be a part of this noble project. It's the first time we're collaborating with ICD, and we're hoping to collaborate in the future. Which brings me to your question. ICD's mission and vision is the promotion of the notion of cultural diplomacy, is to, in a way, to bridge societies that are either prone to conflict or using cultural diplomacy as a preemptive method to prevent conflict. Which is very much in line with my organization's mission and vision. Besides our youth branch, which has an element of cultural diplomacy, dealing with cultural diplomacy at the domestic level between the different sects of society, whether it be the Kurdish and the Turkish and the Armenian minority. You know, we have some minorities in Turkey, and there's an element of conflict between these minorities. So cultural diplomacy we use both as a tool within Turkey, domestically, as well as in our international branch, where we deal with Turkey's near abroad. When I mean near abroad, I mean Turkey's southern neighbors, such as Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, where there's some conflicts going on, both among themselves, between themselves, and between Turkey, especially with Armenia, and also in the Middle East and in the Balkans. Because of the Ottoman history, there's some misperceptions about Turkey, and of course within Turkey about the countries in our near abroad. So what we do is we use the tool of cultural diplomacy and projects very similar to this one that we're indulging in today and the next couple of days, conducting projects as such to bridge the gap between the societies of these countries, and hence prepare the ground for peace for the future. I'm not saying that cultural diplomacy in itself will be the sole solution for peace between these countries, let's say between Turkey and Armenia, but when there's the right moment in the higher politics, in the other track of diplomacy, the civil diplomacy and the cultural diplomacy will be very, very elemental, very, very important component in forging the peace and the understanding between these conflict-prone countries.
Thank you.
The second question is, what is your opinion about the power of cultural diplomacy in the field of conflict resolution, in the case of Libya or Egypt, for instance?
When I ended my words from the prior question, that actually alludes, hints to the answer for this next question. Cultural diplomacy in itself, as I emphasized in the first answer, will not in itself be a solution to conflicts. And I'm not going to specifically talk about Libya or Egypt, but as a rule of thumb, as a general rule, cultural diplomacy in itself may not be and will probably not suffice to hinder conflicts or to resolve conflicts, as in your question, conflict resolutions, will not be the sole tool in conflict resolution. But that being said, it can be a very instrumental tool. Because think about it this way, I'm not speaking as an academic or as a civil society representative. I'm thinking as a regular citizen of the world, as a regular human being. When you have contact between people, like let's say me, Arda Batu, and you two, I don't know you from before. When we have coffee together, I get to know you, and any perception that I may have had before meeting you, before we have that cup of coffee, may be very flawed and will be probably very flawed. When I look at you, I may have a total different understanding about the human being that you are, but after a small engagement, then I can see the true persona or the true human being that you are. So in essence, to bring it to a very human level, cultural diplomacy programs function as such, bringing people together so they see basically that they're not monsters, that they're just human beings also, you know. The same can be applied to Libya, Egypt, and across the globe.
Thank you. My next question is, one of the ARI's main goals is promoting the participation of the Turkish youth in the democratic agenda. What are the main tools that are being used for attracting or promoting democracy among the future generation of Turkey?
Yeah. When you look at Turkey, you see that especially the eastern part of Turkey, the economically lesser developed of Turkey, the part of Turkey where the level of education is also lower as opposed to the western parts of Turkey, you see that the youth in those areas are not very exposed to the knowledge of how they can be politically oriented, how can they be participants in a society, in politics. The gist of what we do is we conduct projects. One of the projects, for instance, we call Political Cafe, where we have young politicians and some senior politicians going to Anatolia and talking about how the young people can technically be members of political parties, technically how they can be active members of society and political parties and civil society organizations. So the one side of the story is providing young people with the practical information on how they can be active in political parties and civil society organizations. Because without the practical knowledge, then theory is good only to a certain sense. So practically, they have to have the knowledge of how to go register for a political party, how to be members of certain committees, and same goes for civil society organizations. What kind of civil society organizations that are available for their interest. So this is the kind of information that we try to deliver to the lesser developed parts of Turkey, so the people over there can be exposed to this knowledge and hence be more active members of society.
Education and information are two of the most important points of focus for the ARI movement. How does the social media or the mass media interact with the activity of the ARI?
Well, social media is, of course, needless to say, extremely important and is becoming more important by the day, not only for Turkey, but the world. Anyone who's been following, from the prior question, the case of Libya, Egypt, Iran, when you look at the social upheavals in those countries, you see the instrumental way the social media has been used in communicating, in getting across the message, in basically creating a movement for democracy, better standard of living, rule of law, you name it. To bring these countries to a higher level of civilization. We as ARI movement, of course, try to utilize this very critical instrument the same way that it has been used across the globe, namely to get our message across to the young people. Anyone with a smartphone or using Facebook or using Twitter, we try to convey our messages with the projects that we conduct through this medium of communication.
Well, another question would be, from your point of view, is it easy for isolated community, community far from big cities, to interact with important actors in the political screen?
The isolated people, communities. Is it difficult for isolated communities to interact with
important political actors?
Yes, it is, but it's a difficult question because when you look at isolated communities, all sorts of communication is more restricted. In the big cities, it's not any easier because the life in the big city is a lot more hectic. People really don't give so much importance in meeting these political figures or important figures. I'll give you an example. In the projects that we conduct in the big cities in Turkey, for instance, Istanbul and Ankara, but especially Istanbul, we interestingly see less of an interest in the young population as opposed to the projects that we conduct in Anatolia. Why? Because Anatolia is more, or eastern part of Turkey is more isolated, and they're more hungry. You know, they have more of an appetite, let's say, to meet, you know, important people, to get to talk to, you know, these opinion leaders, political leaders. But Istanbul, you know, or Ankara, these leaders are easier to access. Hence, when something is a classical economic theory, you know, the supply and demand. If something is supplied more, then it's not demanded as much. But if supply is more scarce, as in the eastern part of Turkey, then there's more demand by the young population or the population at large to try to gain access to these people.
So you spoke about equity and equal access, but what does the ARI movement do in order to offer equal opportunities for everybody to participate or to be active or updated with all news regarding democracy in Turkey?
Again, I mean, I don't want to be redundant, but it again boils down to the question of the inequality between the territory within Turkey. Some territories have less access to information. You know, I mean, now we're in the 21st century and almost everyone has internet, so people do have access to information. But the young people, more often than not, are not being taught, you know, this political culture of going to the right address to gain, you know, political information or, you know, self-developmental information. You know, I mean, you may have the same level of access to internet in territory A and territory B, but in territory B, there's more of an interest because of the upbringing, because of the less exposure to information and education. They play, I don't know, internet games or, you know, watch more porno as opposed to, you know, looking at educational or, you know, informative materials. So it's actually a whole, you know, the level of education, the level of exposure, they have to be equally raised in these lesser developed geographies.
And you lead some action in that aim?
Yes, yes. That's why we try to go more to the more isolated areas. That was the answer you're looking for. Yes, we go more to these isolated areas because simply they need more access. It's not very special to give access to people who already have access. It's more important to try to go to people areas where there's less access.
How do you provide access?
By simply going there and conducting programs, projects, workshops. You know, the political cafe example I gave was a good one. We would like to do it more. I mean, ideally, but also the governments and the state has to be important push. They have to give an important. They have to buttress this idea of, you know, penetrating this area. We're doing a number of projects ranging from cultural diplomacy projects to, you know, the constitutional reform process in Turkey. The constitutional reform process in Turkey is also very important, and the eastern part of Turkey has less of an access to knowledge about what the hell the constitutional reform process is about. You know, they simply don't have the information. I mean, some of the villages, some of the areas don't even have newspapers. Yes, they have internet maybe, but if you don't have the culture to gain to use the information or to look for information, then obviously you're not going to find it. It's not going to be abundant. So again, with the very critical issue in Turkey about the constitutional reform process is we as ARI movement are going to Anatolia, to eastern part of Turkey, to give information, to, you know, with booklets, you know, workshops, to give this disperse this information to the population over there and try to help them better understand what the constitutional reform is, what they should demand, you know, what's missing for them, what they would want.
Well, my last question is, your foundation is also trying to promote freedom and of thought and expression. How would you define the current situation of the freedom of expression in Turkey?
I mean, it's no surprise that Turkey is not a cradle of democracy, human rights, or the freedom of speech or expression. We have had major problems in this area, and well, to look at the positive side, there have been some significant improvements in terms of human rights and freedom of speech, but this obviously is far from the ideal state of being. Maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, some of the issues that we freely now discuss on television and on the press could not be discussed. Now you can talk about some of the issues, the Kurdish issue, women's rights issues, children's issues. I mean, you name it. We can talk about everything. But at the same time, of course, we still have a bad record in terms of freedom of speech and expression. We have an absurd number of journalists now in jail. There's a problem in terms of the time that we keep these journalists in custody, because you have to understand that these people have not been charged or officially prosecuted with a crime. They're being tried as we speak, but they're being tried in prison, and these are writers, journalists, and this, of course, is a shameful situation, and there's absolutely no excuse for it. The current government has had some reforms in this respect. As I said, 10 years ago, I think if I have to make an objective comparison, Turkey is at a better state as opposed to 10 years ago when the current government started to rule. But again, there's no excuse for lagging so much behind in terms of the universal standards that you can see in Europe or Western Europe or the US. So in a nutshell, yes, there has been some improvements, but no, we are far from the ideal state in terms of freedom of speech and expression.
Thank you very much for speaking with us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.